Hey everyone, Father Lane here. Welcome to another class in our pre-theology introduction to the Bible. You can see I'm outside the Parthenon in Athens, Greece right here, and it's appropriate because today we are going to talk about the Greek period of the Old Testament, or the Hellenistic era as it's otherwise called. This is a period where Alexander the Great exported Greek culture all around the Mediterranean world, and how the Greeks made their mark on the Bible. Here in the Old Testament, but as we're going to see, this also functions as a transition from the Old Testament period into the New Testament period. Today, we're going to be looking principally at the deuterocanonical books of the Old Testament. As you'll remember, there are 7 deuterocanonical books. You can see them on your screen right in front of you. There's also additions to Esther and Daniel. Let's look at our agenda for today. We're going to look first at the historical narrative, which we find in 1st and 2nd Maccabees, 2 of these deuterocanonical books. Then we're going to look at the prophecy and poetry, and indeed some other literature that comes from this era, especially the apocalyptic literature of the book of Daniel. And then we'll conclude by looking at the Greek legacy. Why does this period matter? Indeed, this is a somewhat overlooked period, especially in Protestant circles where the deuterocanonical books are not considered inspired scripture. This is sometimes called the silent years, these 400 years where there's no revelation. Now, as Catholics, we don't accept that, but it's led to a neglect of this era in a lot of the American biblical imagination. I want to just look at some of the major moments of this era. As we said in our last class, the Persian period turns into the Greek period, or the Hellenistic period, in 332 BC when Alexander the Great conquers Palestine. A problem is going to arise in the next decade, though. Alexander dies, and there's not a clear succession plan. So what happens? Well, his generals jockey for position, and they end up dividing up the Greek Empire with different generals in charge of different areas. The 2 that are most important for our purposes are going to be the Seleucid rulers, who are going to rule from Syria. You see on your map here the town of Seleucia, and this is going to be near the city, which will be much more prominent in later eras, of Antioch. This will be important during the patristic era in the early church. The Antiochene school is going to be very important in the development of Trinitarian and Christological theology. That's to be contrasted with the Ptolemies, who rule from Alexandria, Egypt. Throughout the 3rd century BC, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids are going to be jockeying for position. But during the 5th Syrian War, between 202 BC and 195 BC, so this is the turn of the 3rd to the 2nd century, the Seleucids from Antioch, from the Syrian area, are going to seize control of the Holy Land from the Ptolemies. Initially, there's no problem. But there will be a problem in 190 BC when the Seleucid king Antiochus III is defeated by Rome, who imposes a tribute. Antiochus is going to have a problem. He's going to need to raise money, and so he's going to do it by raiding temples within his jurisdiction. This touches on the Holy Land in Jerusalem especially. In 174 BC, a priest named Jason is going to purchase the high priesthood. This helps the Greeks raise money. This will lead to a period where a number of Jews start to take and accommodate Greek practices. So there's an internal strife within Judaism here in the early 2nd century between those who are faithful to the traditions and those who are more accommodating to Greek practices. The matters come to a head in the next decade under the Seleucid king Antiochus IV Epiphanes. He is going to mandate Hellenization, require Jews to eat pork, not observe the Sabbath, not observe circumcision. He's going to order a pig sacrificed in the Jerusalem temple, all sorts of sacrilege. Martyrs will be made during this era, and they're going to be reflected in the 2 books of Maccabees. However, a family of priests known as the Hasmoneans, led by Judas Maccabeus, is going to lead a revolt. This happens between 167 and 164 BC, which concludes with victory for the Maccabees over the Seleucids, the reestablishment of a relative Jewish autonomy in Jerusalem. Again, they're still under Greek control, but they have a relative autonomy from that time forward for another century. The temple will be rededicated in 164 BC. This gives rise to the Jewish feast of Hanukkah, or the dedication. We're going to see that feast of the dedication / Hanukkah alluded to in John chapter 10. So this is important for the New Testament as well. The Hasmoneans are going to be pious at first and faithful Jews at first, but over the next century, as they gain territory in the Holy Land, they're going to increasingly become corrupt, provoking opposition. The Hasmoneans also form an alliance with Rome, sort of as a hedge against Greek rule. All of this is going to backfire in 63 BC when the Roman general Pompey comes into Palestine and seizes control of the Holy Land for Rome, bringing an end to Hasmonean rule, that is, rule by the high priests. You can see how this begins some of the tension that we're going to see during the life of Jesus reflected in the Gospels, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. So let's look at 1st and 2nd Maccabees. The key thing to know here about these two books is that unlike 1st and 2nd Samuel, unlike 1st and 2nd Kings, and unlike 1st and 2nd Chronicles, these two books are not a continuation. They're not a sequence. They don't have the same author. Rather, they are two distinctly written books covering more or less the same time period with competing theologies. 1st Maccabees has a more traditional theology. Contrast that with 2nd Maccabees, which has a broader span. It begins earlier and ends later, all in the 2nd century BC, and has what we might call a more progressive theology. 2nd Maccabees professes faith in a resurrection of the body, life after death. It also talks about angels, prayers for the dead. None of those things do we see in 1st Maccabees or in earlier written books of the Hebrew Bible. 2nd Maccabees was likely written in Greek. Let's go ahead and take a glance now at the poetry and prophecy of the Hellenistic era. We begin briefly with the book of Ben Sira, or Sirach as it's sometimes called. Look at this passage from Sirach chapter 6. When you gain friends, gain them through testing, and do not be quick to trust them. For there are friends when it suits them, but they will not be around in time of trouble. Those who fear the Lord enjoy stable friendship, for as they are, so will their neighbors be. At first glance, this seems to be rather pedestrian advice about choosing friends, but it's much more than that. It's telling us how God is choosing his friends. The book of Sirach is written around the time of the Maccabean revolt. Indeed, we know it was written in Hebrew originally and then later translated into Greek and expanded over time. Hebrew manuscripts have only been found in the last 125 years or so. God is testing his friends. Contrast what we're seeing here with Deuteronomy, where sin causes evil. In Sirach here, evil is part of God's plan. It's maturing. You can see this developing towards where we're going to end up in the New Testament. Let's take a look now at the book of Daniel, which is absolutely unique in the Old Testament. It's written in 3 languages. There's a part written in Hebrew, a part written in Aramaic, and another part written in Greek. The latter of those is the deuterocanonical section. It's also the only clearly apocalyptic book in the Old Testament. Apocalyptic literature was a special kind of literature that dominated within Judaism from, say, the 3rd century BC through the 2nd century AD, and it was the literature of the persecuted. It recognized that while people may suffer in this world, God will be victorious in the next. Apocalyptic literature recognized that just as the Assyrians had their day of dominance, and so did the Babylonians and so did the Persians, so too do the Greeks, especially Antiochus IV Epiphanes. And we notice when we look at the book of Daniel that while the figure of Daniel was known to the prophet Ezekiel, you can see it in this passage right here from Ezekiel 13, we have a lot of apocalyptic features. He has a vision of the archangel Gabriel. We're also going to hear about the archangel Michael through a vision, and this vision corresponds with the history of the Greek period. You'll see here in Daniel chapter 11 a despicable person. That's Antiochus IV Epiphanes. We also see in the book of Daniel the sole proto-canonical, that is Hebrew Bible reference to life after death. You can see it right here. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, others to reproach and everlasting disgrace. But those with insight shall shine brightly like the splendor of the firmament, and those who lead the many to justice shall be like the stars forever. So let's conclude with a quick reflection on why this matters. The Greek period is something like glue connecting the Old Testament and the New Testament. It explains all these things that you see on your screen. The answer to all 6 of these questions is because Greece. Because Alexander the Great conquered the Holy Land, the New Testament is written in Greek. It explains all sorts of things about how St. Paul crafted his letters. His letters are written in Greek, so he's speaking to Greek speakers, and he's synthesizing Hebrew categories with Greek categories. We're going to see that in the New Testament, which will be the subject of our next class. Until then, read well and pray well.